Are you acquainted with the characteristics of both man-in-the-middle and man-in-the-browser attacks? Well, if not, we're having that conversation, and that is starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV, and today we are talking about man-in-the-middle and subsequently as well man-in-the-browser type of attacks. These are really interesting attacks. I've been through a lot of security audits and things of that nature, and a lot of times this was exactly the methodology the pen testers used, the vulnerability assessors used to gain some sort of access or found a flaw or a problem utilizing this type of attack. So something we need to be aware of and familiarized with. Wes, you're going to help us out with that. Why don't we go ahead and just start off with a man-in-the-middle attack. Seems a bit self-explanatory. There's probably a little more to it than that.
Absolutely, and it's one we really honestly, Dan, since we've been talking about all these different type of attacks, it really forms the basis for a lot of the other attack types that, we have out there when we talk about things like session hijacking, if we talk about, replay attacks, just to give a couple of examples here where we talk about things like cross-site scripting attacks, right? There is some kind of service, some kind of end-to-end communication that's going on and somebody sitting in between. So when we talk about something like the not man in the browser, but man in the middle, like Dan said, let's go ahead and just take a look here real quick. So we've got an authorized user, all right, and that user is going to authenticate typically against some kind of server, and it doesn't necessarily have to be clear text. I'm going to give you this example for our conversation and the demonstration purposes that we're going to do here. Please understand that if somebody gets in the middle of these communications, you don't necessarily have to be using clear text for it to be exploited. Now, that's definitely a good way to make it a lot easier on this gentleman standing next to me if we're doing some kind of vulnerability assessment. If you got clear text protocols, then basically what you're doing is kind of making it easier on the hacker. But you do want to know that it could be something like maybe a session hijacking attack, or maybe somebody is scraping a session cookie and then replaying it against the server. But for sake of this demonstration, it is essentially a person sitting in the middle between two endpoint communications.
Yeah, you say it makes it easier for the attacker. Yeah, if you're using clear text protocols, then you're basically saying, here's my info, you put it in a pretty little package, put a bow on it, write hacker on it, and you send it away. And UPS delivers it next day. It's great. They love it. So try to steer clear of these clear text protocols whenever you can.
Definitely. And coming up, when we get into more of our section, when we talk a little bit more about things like cryptography, we'll talk a little bit more about secure protocols that can help to mitigate the risk and at least bring it down to an acceptable level. But when that happens, remember that a person that is in between, they say man in the middle, doesn't have to just be the men. Trust me, plenty of ladies out there that are wearing that security hat too. Gets in the middle and basically can redirect this communication any way essentially they want. If they're sniffing the traffic, then they're eavesdropping. However, if they're capturing that traffic, remember they can store it at a later time, potentially at a later time, and essentially replay that information back to the server, gaining access to some kind of resource. So really just be aware and familiar with the man-in-the-middle attack, because it does form the basis for a lot of the other attacks that we've talked about up until this point.
All right, well there you go, there's man-in-the-middle, but we also have the man-in-the-browser attack. Could you kind of walk us through exactly what a man-in-the-browser attack is? How does that differ from something like a traditional man-in-the-middle?
Oh, sure. So, when we talk about a man-in-the-middle attack, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's against like an HTTP web browser or HTTPS for that matter. So now what we're talking about, same concept, right? So we have, for instance, our authorized user here, probably seen one of these family of applications once or twice in your life, maybe connecting to something like, a web login portal or something. However, keep in mind that, the user can log in, but if the attacker out there can get some kind of malicious payload after the user's logged in and then maybe send some kind of crafted HTML request against that web application, then they can potentially exploit the trust that the authenticated user has with the web application sitting in between that browser and gaining information, maybe downloading a session cookie. Remember, session cookies can, if they're not coded right, they can contain more information potentially than they should, and that could lead to vulnerabilities in the web browser as well, and that can lead to some kind of avenue of attack. If they can exploit that trust, they could potentially make these malicious HTTP requests, perform functions on the behalf of the user or the victim in this case, and the victim might be unaware that this is even happening. Could be fund transfers like we've talked about in the past, depending on whether you're talking about cross-site scripting attacks, cross-site, request forgery attacks, but typically that end game is going to result or at least start in some kind of man-in-the-browser attack.
Yeah, it totally sounds like a lot of these specific types of attacks that we've already discussed kind of fall under the umbrella of a man-in-the-middle, man-of-the-browser. So try not to get confused on that. Man-in-the-middle, man-in-the-browser is we'll keep that as a generic philosophy of attack, whereas we have more specific attacks underneath those that work in that way. All right, Wes, now that we've hopefully dispelled some of that maybe disinformation or uninformation, they are now up to speed. Why don't you give us some demonstration of how a little bit of this works?
Sounds good. So what we've got are a couple of Linux machines here, and I've got Kali set up, and we've got another Linux machine in the background here. And I know that it's running FTP on the network, and if you're familiar with FTP, remember File Transfer Protocol. Typically, we don't use this by itself. We typically will couple that with something like SSH, certificate-based authentication, maybe have a certificate, authentication in general, so we have secure encrypted communication. But let me show you what can happen here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, and I know that's extremely small to see here, I'm just going to fire up Wireshark. And remember, Wireshark is our packet capture utility that we're using here. It comes installed on Kali. If you're not running Kali, you can get this for Mac, you can get this for Windows, you can get it for Linux. And I highly recommend you be familiar with what a packet sniffer looks like. Get in there and kind of look at the protocols so you can see stuff like this as well. What we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our interface here, and we're going to just start doing a little bit of capture on that interface here. And I'm going to try to generate some traffic by doing an FTP session over to our FTP server here and see if we can get some traffic going on here. And you can see that it is allowing me to connect. Let's see here. It does look like we got some transmission or some FTP traffic going on. Let's go ahead. Let's send an authentication request here to the server. And let's see. Looks like I have successfully logged in. We'll do a dir here, and it's giving me, hey, this is where you're at. You're in this directory. I could probably do something. I could attempt to do something like this and see if I can get out of that directory. If I know how to type .. maybe we can do it. And I'll hit entry and notice, or enter, and notice it says that we did have a directory successfully changed. If we run an ls or a dir now, you can see that I'm navigating my way back through this FTP server. Now, the big thing is not so much that I'm navigating the FTP server, right? If I'm a logged in user, then I should be authorized to do that. Here's where the problem comes in. I want you to see some things here. Right away, I can see up here without even scrolling. You remember when we did the cd .. // Well, look at these commands right here. They are in clear text. You can see the fact that I'm running commands against this server by what we did as far as the packet capture. And if I go back up here to where the FTP first started, I could just right-click on it, choose follow, and we can follow the stream here. And notice what it shows me here, right here, Dan. Notice we've got user, there's my username. Password, there's the password, and then some of the commands that we were running. So if a user or if an attacker is out there sniffing the network and you're using clear text protocols like this, you can see the information that they can extrapolate from basically the packets that they can capture, and they can use that later to log in as an authorized user. And even though they're not the authorized user, like we've talked about, and I think Dan's mentioned this before, you pass an authentication that's successful off to the server, there's no way for the that authentication system know that you're not, or that attacker is not the authorized user. Now let me show you one of the things that we can do to kind of mitigate this. I'm gonna go back over to our command or our terminal here. And I'll choose a quit, and let's clear the screen here. And if I use something like SSH, and let's see, we'll do, what was that password? 192.168.0. I really need to use better IP addresses for my typing abilities. Now you'll notice that I'm doing SSH, and here's the RSA key that it's wanting me to confirm that I want to put into the trusted host. And you know, it looks like I am getting a password. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. All right, so I'm in via SSH, and let's see here. I don't know if I started, I'll tell you what. We'll try this one more time. I'm going to quit that session and exit. There we go. Because if you're going to do packet capture, it does help to start the actual capture. What I want to just kind of show you here is if we do this with something like SSH, and notice that I am putting in the password here and I'm logged in. If we go back here and we just kind of stop this, one of the things you're going to notice is that, notice there's SSH here, and notice how everything starts out, and it's like, oh, here's our three-way handshake with TCP, but then at some point SSH kicks in and it says, well, wait a second, we got to do this with an encrypted communication, and now you can see a key exchange going on here, but notice that we now have encrypted information, and if I expand this out, and I'll zoom in on this, notice that here's our SSH protocol, and look at all this gobbledygook. And yes, that is technical terms there. It's encrypted information. I can't see what's going on here. So when it comes to man-in-the-middle attacks, remember, protect yourself by using secure protocols, and you can keep attacks like this not completely from happening. Never say never, but you can at least mitigate the risk or bring them down to an acceptable level so they don't happen within your networks.
All right. Well, Wes, thanks so much for explaining these man-in-the-middle, man-in-the-browser types of attacks, and even get a little bit of a demonstration of how one of those types of attacks may work or end up. That being said, that is the end of this episode, but there is plenty more to come in our Security Plus series, so hopefully we will see you then. Until then, have yourself a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.